All cap letters, it says allergy warning, contains cashews. So I'm wondering, I'd like to meet the person who's allergic to nuts, who looks at this and says, raw cashews, I think I can eat this. Allergy contains cashews, oh, okay, forget it, I'm not going to eat that, right? I mean, some things are too obvious to need to be said. And so too, when we think about what's the Jewish responsibility to helping people in the world, our first reaction might be, do we really need to speak about this? I mean, do you need a source, a text to tell you that if there's someone dying of hunger and you have some extra food that you should help them out? Doesn't our internal conscience say, obviously you need to do that? And what would be the value of Judaism or any sacred tradition if this was not at the bedrock, at the very foundation of everything that we believe in and strive for? So, in one sense, the topic is obvious. However, sometimes even obvious things sometimes need to be reinforced. And I think in this case especially, there are a tremendous amount of nuances and complexities that arise in its application. And especially because we have a long history and such a rich tradition that we think about a changing world, having a state of Israel, being prosperous in America. And this brings up, in fact, new complexities and new challenges and new opportunities. And so it's worthwhile going back and mining our tradition for the vision of the Torah and the prophets and all the other voices and interpretations to think again about what is our responsibility to those in need around the world. And so I'd like to start and focus tonight on the most fundamental principle, the pasuk Ve'avta l'recha kamocha, which Rabbi Akiva says in the Sifra, Ze klal gadol b'Torah. This is a fundamental principle. Love your neighbor as yourself. So it's great, that's a fundamental principle. The problem with it is that each of its three words is difficult to understand. And so I'd like to organize my talk tonight analyzing each of these three words, Ve'avta, l'recha, and kamocha. So first of all, Ve'avta, to love your neighbor as you do yourself. How can you command someone an emotion? How can I tell you, I want you to love someone else? And it's one thing if I, put you in a room together for hours, so you get to know each other, and go out to eat together. But a stranger, someone who just happens to live nearby, and I command you should love them, and not just love them like you love an acquaintance, but love them like you love your own, like you love your child, like you love yourself. I mean, how can anyone command this? We come to a similar question. We come to other mitzvot like V'avta et Hashem Elokecha. Right? Sometimes we feel great love to God, but how can you command an emotion? And I think the answer to this is by looking at a good Bible dictionary, where you see that the word ahav can mean to love, but in ancient times, in the ancient Near East, this word appears in many contracts and documents between two parties with the meaning of be committed to, be loyal to. Right? And sometimes that involves love also. But here's a great insight, I think, in terms of marriage as well. Love is an important part of marriage, but even more fundamental is the commitment that you bring to it, right? The loyalty that you bring to it. And then you can build love on top of that. Other way around, it usually doesn't work. And so here also we can translate it this way. Be loyal, be committed to the needs of your fellow as you are to yourself. And if we understand it that way, then it becomes a lot more approachable, understandable, commandable. And I think it's for this reason that a later sage rephrases it, actually an earlier sage, earlier than Rabbi Akiva, the famous story about Hayil. The convert comes and says, teach me the whole Torah while standing on one foot, and he says, Da'alach sani lechabrach la ti'ibid. That which is hateful to you, do not do to your friend. Zohi kol Torah kula v'idach perushahi zil gemor. That's it. That's the whole Torah, just in there, and the rest you can go and study and unpack the nuances of it. Right? And you see how he's taking it and turning it into this opposite, the negative. Not do unto others, but don't do unto others what you would not want to done unto yourself. So he's understanding this emotion. Love your neighbor as an action, or in this case, a non-action. Just don't harm one another the way you wouldn't want to be harmed. That's just fundamental enough. If you can accomplish establish that, right, then you've got a lot. And maybe you felt like it's too difficult to do the positive also, but in the Western world, the popular phrase is do unto others as you would want done unto yourself. So you see that phrase also focuses on the action. Okay, good. All right, so now we have some understanding of the first word, v'avta, right? It means to be loyal and committed in our action to do and to refrain from doing those things which we would want to have done to us or not done to ourselves. Now, let's skip to the last word, kamocha, as yourself. And here also, it's defining this commitment in a subjective way. Because people have different approaches to themselves. Some people like to eat very little. Some days they only drink water for 3 days to cleanse themselves. And so then you go to a poor person and says, I think it's time for a cleansing a diet of 3 days, and therefore I'm not going to give you food because that's what I do. I mean, does that make any sense, right? And so people have different opinions about themselves. For example, the Talmud commenting on this says, maybe one will say, since I am hated, I should hate my fellow as well. Since I've been cursed, I should curse my fellow as well. This is a common psychological reaction to someone who has suffered something. Well, if I suffered this, then I should do this to others. When I was a student, my teachers treated me this way. Now I'm a teacher, I could do that to them, right? Somehow that's justified. Okay, and so therefore, a colleague of Rabbi Akiva has a different source. Ben Azai says, Omer ze sefer toldot ha'adam, ze klal gadol mizeh. An even greater principle than your principle of V'ahavta lecha kamocha is the first pasuk in chapter 5 of Bereshit. Ze sefer toldot ha'adam. Here is the book of the generations of mankind, which doesn't seem to actually command anything. But the rest of the pasuk says, B'yom bero Elokim adam, b'dmut Elokim asa oto. God created mankind in His image. And so here Ben Azai is introducing another source for the value and importance of human rights, the fact that we are all created in God's image, and this is an objective definition, right? Everybody is the same. It's not dependent on what you happen to like or not like. It's because each person is created with infinite value, and therefore these rights are inalienable. And this sense of it comes forth most beautifully in a very famous Mishnah in Sanhedrin. Before a witness comes to the stand to testify in a capital case, the judges tell them, warn them about the danger of false testimony that might lead to a conviction and execution of an innocent person. And so they tell him, remember Adam was created alone? And why? Well, giraffes and elephants and fish and birds, they were all created, the whole species, many, right, were created. But Adam, only one person. Why? Accordingly, one man was created to teach you that someone who destroys a single life is considered by Scripture to have destroyed the entire world. And someone who sustains a single life is considered by Scripture to have sustained the entire world. Because the whole world, all of humanity, comes from one person, right? And any one person can give birth over generations to an infinite amount of people. Therefore, every person is equal to all of humanity. Every person has absolute infinite value. You can't compare this one life to 3 others. Everything is infinite. That's number one. And second of all, for the sake of peace among God's creations, no one can say to his fellow, my father is greater than yours, or my race is better than yours, because we all come from the same ancestor, so we're all cousins. So therefore, racism is impossible. And third, to describe the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that a human king mints coins with his face on it, but they're all exactly the same. But God creates humans in His image, yet each and every person is a little bit different. We can recognize everyone and see their individuality and celebrate the diversity. And so what you have here is 3 important lessons that they're all deriving from this fundamental that Ben Azai had of being in God's image. Number 1, everybody's of infinite value, equality of all humanity, and the diversity inherent in each of us. And so now that we have this, we go back to the Rabbi Akiva. Says, Rabbi Akiva, what about you? Right? Why are you saying that it just depends on what you like? But actually, Rabbi Akiva could say at the end of the pasuk, "Va'avtecha kamocha, ani Hashem," because I am God, because I created you. Therefore, right? And so, in fact, I think they can work together. Rabbi Akiva is giving you a measuring stick. How much should I do? Well, I can figure that out by thinking about my own experience if I put myself in that person's shoes. And so here we have the source for it, and now we have V'ahavta means to be committed to in your practice and loyal to all other people, and maybe if you want to love them also, it's even better, but at least in action. And kamocha meaning, well, it's a good way of figuring out how much you have to do, but even more fundamentally, ani Hashem, that we're all created in infinite value. And so therefore, we use both our subjective analysis to figure out how much, but ultimately it boils down to an objective reason that we are all B'Tselem Elokim. And so now we get to the center word, which is really, in a way, the most complicated. L're'acha, to your neighbor. And I guess our question is, who is your neighbor? Right? What does that mean to be one's neighbor? How many blocks away? Right? What if they're even on Avenue J? If you live on S, I mean, is that also your neighbor? How about someone in Deal? How about past Avenue X? Is that, does that count? What does this mean to be a neighbor? And so we look throughout the Torah, and we see there are a number of terms that are used, like achicha, lo tashich leachicha neshech kesef. Do not extract usury, interest from achicha, from your brother. Right? But then it says lanochrit tigos, from a foreigner you can charge interest, but not to your brother. And many laws, right, help out your brother who's poor, are meant use that term brother. Others use amit, your fellow, right, your friend, and yet others use other terms that are similar. And so amit, otherwise the re'acha, which means neighbor. And so what is the meaning of all these terms? Are they meant to be exclusive and say only someone who's achicha, amitecha, or re'echa, and not some other group? Or are these meant to be inclusive, to say not only your biological brother or best friend, but also other people, right? So where's the limit of our responsibility, and are there a number of circles? And so I think if we just think about it ourselves, I think we would all recognize that there's a difference between human rights and membership rights. Right? Certain things, certain obligations are necessary just because of someone's humanity, giving them food, clothing, shelter, liberty, freedom from oppression, freedom from poverty. These are just basic human rights, right? That they're just required by the dignity of any human being, right? What we said before, being infinite, B'Tselem Elokim. There are other rights that we give only because you're a member. If you're a member, you're a citizen of the United States, then you have voting rights and the right to run for office. If you're a member of Beth Torah, you have certain rights of having a seat, right? And does it come with any other rights? No, that's about it. Right? And so you can create a membership group, and therefore you're endowed rights above and beyond human rights because you're part of that group. And we all understand making a distinction between one or another, and a group might be one's family, so obligation to one's family goes above and beyond what it does to anyone else in humanity. Maybe membership in a school, in a synagogue, in a group of friends, and perhaps if you're a member, if you're a doctor and you're membership of that group, so you have obligations other people don't have. If there's a crisis, member of police or firemen, and so on. Right? So there's membership rights that are accorded specifically because of that. So these terms, re'echa, your friend, your neighbor, is that a membership group or something talking about all of humanity? That's my basic question. And so let's look at a few sources, a few Pesukim where this comes up. And one that's very famous is all the way in the beginning of Bereshit in the Exodus story. It says, "V'yishalu ish met re'ehu, v'isha met re'ota, kele chesef u'kle zahav." before the Israelites are about to leave Egypt, right, Moshe commands them, go and ask your neighbors for gold and silver vessels, right? And they come out, their neighbors, their Egyptian neighbors, give it to them, and maybe in the way of reparations, of feeling bad that they enslaved them all this time. And so it uses the word re'ehu, and clearly is talking about the Egyptians, non-Israelites. And so based on that, we can say re'ehu means, it might be neighbor, but whether the neighbor is part of your family or part of your ethnicity or not. Now, why only neighbor? Why not someone far away? Well, people generally interact with their neighbors more than someone far away. I mean, how you didn't have UPS, you couldn't send something to someone in a foreign land, right? And so the people that you interact with on a daily basis, those are your neighbors, regardless of their race or their background. And so I think we can prove this because the pasuk says, "Ki yaguri techager b'atzechem lo tunu oto." V'avta lo kamocha, and so it's talking about clearly a ger, which means a ger toshav, a stranger, someone who's maybe has a visa or a green card but is not a citizen, is not part of an intrinsic part of your group, and still v'avta lo kamocha, we're using the same term, so we just might replace that. And so therefore, l'reacha couldn't possibly mean only someone from Bnei Israel, but even a foreigner that comes to live with you. And so this is very important because other Pesukim like Lo tamod al dam re'echa, don't stand by while your neighbor is whose life is in danger. Would anyone think that if it was not a Jewish life that you would not have to save them? Besedek tishpot amitecha, you should judge your friend, your neighbor justly. Lo tachmod titaveh bet re'echa, and so on. And so this seems obvious that re'ehu should apply to all of humanity. However, I think that's the pshat of the Torah. You agree? Okay. However, within the Jewish tradition, we see another voice also. Not the inclusive voice of re'acha. Maybe there's a higher level for one's family and for Jews, but these basic levels, justice and saving people's lives and all that seems to apply to everyone. However, there's another voice, and I'd like to analyze this for a few minutes, and then evaluate them. And this other voice quotes. Here's one example. Pasuk says, "Ki gof shor ish et shor re'ahu." If one person's ox gores your neighbor's ox, and so it might mean everybody, but the Mishnah comes along and says, if an ox of a Jew gores that of an idolater, he doesn't have to pay. But if the other way around, then he does have to pay. That seems very strange. I mean, either you're responsible for your ox or not. Why should it matter one or the other? And it goes on to say, Shor re'ehu, only if it gores an ox of another Jew, then you have to pay. But if it's not re'ehu, he's not your neighbor, he's an idolater, right? And so now it's defining there not as physical proximity or any human being, but rather what one practices. And this came up because there's a very interesting story that the Roman government once sent two messengers, two officials to the sages, to Rabbi Gamliel, and he said, teach me your whole Torah. And he sat down, taught the whole Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, Mishnah, Gemara, Halacha. These are very, very bright Roman officials. And at the end of all the lessons, the Roman official said, your Torah is beautiful. Everything in it is wonderful and fantastic and aspiring, except for this one law. Why the double standard, right? How do you do that? How do you treat one person, right, one group the other, but not the other way around? He says, but since we like you so much, we're not going to report this back to the government. So that's the story. But so you see here that the fact that the rabbis are retelling the story is that the rabbis feel anxiety about the double standard and have to try to think about what the reason is. Another Gemara says, "Lo tanu ish tamito," don't wrongdo someone. Amit, your amit. Et she'itecha b'Torah mitzvot al tonehu. The distinction is not between Jew and idolater, but even among Jews, don't wrongdo someone who is with you in Torah mitzvot, someone who is observant in your community. But a Jew who is not is also excluded, right? And so this is very interesting, using these different definitions. One more text that reflects exclusion is the Mishnah itself that I quoted, right? Adam is quoted is created as one to teach us that one man is created, one person is like the whole world. But if you look at printed editions of this Mishnah, it says, Kol ha'me'abed nefesh achat mi'Yisrael. Someone who kills a Jewish life as if he killed the world entire. Someone who saves a Jewish life as he saved the world entire. And you wonder, why a Jewish life? And that doesn't make any sense if they're learning it from Adam, and Adam wasn't Jewish, he wasn't part of any race or ethnicity. That's the whole point. And so how could they do that? And if you like, in fact, if you look at the manuscript of the Mishnah, which I have a copy here, there's one of the oldest manuscripts of the Mishnah, you see the word Yisrael is not there. I think this is really fascinating because if you ever saw Schindler's List, all the way at the end, when they're finally redeemed, they use their gold fillings to make Schindler a ring, right? And do you remember what they inscribe in the ring? They inscribe this Mishnah: whoever saves a life is as if he saved the world entire. And if you know, so it's really beautiful. Schindler is German, and he risked his life to save Jews. And so the Steven Spielberg, I'm not sure if he checked the manuscript and that's why he left it out, or he just thought it would ruin the movie. But one time I was watching this movie in Israel with Hebrew subtitles, and whoever typed in the Hebrew subtitles added the word Yisrael back in, right? So thereby kind of ruining the scene. Okay, if taking a smoking break in the middle didn't already ruin the movie. Okay, and so we see here that there is a trend in many texts to interpret Re'acha as meaning only a Jew, or even maybe only a Torah observant Jew. And therefore all these laws apply only to that very specific group, and they're very exclusionary to anyone else. So this is one trajectory of our tradition. Let's put it onto the side, and I want to bring the other side, and then we'll bring it all together. And this is a number of stories from around the same time, some earlier, that show a different point of view within the rabbis themselves. Here's a wonderful story about Shimon ben Shattach. He had a difficult job. He had to trade flax, and the student said to him, "We want to ease your burden, so that you can spend more time studying Torah. So we're going to buy you a donkey, and then you won't have to work anymore." So they went to some nomad, and they bought a donkey from him, and a pearl was suspended from. For some reason, the owner decided a good place to hide his pearl was on his donkey, and they brought it to. He said, "Here, Rabbi. Now you don't have to work anymore. You can sell the pearl, and you'll be fine." And he said, "Why?" He said, "We bought it from this Bedouin guy. The pearl is suspended from it." The rabbi says, "Does the owner know that it was sold with this?" They said, "No." This is when they have to go return it. But the student said, "But isn't that in the halacha that if a non-Jew loses something that you don't have to return it?" So the rabbi, Shimon ben Shattach, says to them, "What do you think? Is Shimon ben Shattach a barbarian?" That's the exact word. They use barbarian, right, in Aramaic. And right, I mean, what does this mean? You're quoting me some technicality of some law in some book, right? Just basic common sense. I'm not a barbarian. Furthermore, Shimon ben Shattach wants him to say, "Blessed be the God of the Jews." Right? I want to make a Kiddush Hashem. Right? And see, really two reasons here. One is internal, that it wouldn't make sense for him. He doesn't want to be that kind of person that does that. And second of all, he wants people to have a good opinion of the Jews. Here's another one that's a story. Here's another one that's a halacha. It's a Tosefta. It says, Gentile poor are supported along with Jewish poor for the sake of the ways of peace. Gentile dead are buried and mourned for the sake of ways of peace. Gentile mourners are comforted for the sake of the way of peace. Mipnei darkei shalom. And darkei shalom is a high level. It's not because of Eva. It's not because if we don't do this, they'll be jealous, they'll make a pogrom against us. This is a positive value. We want to be at peace, be at one, be on good terms with everybody else. And therefore we collect money for our poor. Together with that, we collect a little extra for the poor of those from different communities. That's a halacha. A last example from this, Rambam says regarding an Eved Kanaani. He says even though the halacha technically is that a Canaanite slave, one is allowed to burden them. However, from the right thing to do is to be merciful and pursue justice, and not to verbally abuse your slave, but to treat them kindly, like Eov said. Did not he that made me in the womb also make him? Right? It's true, now I'm the owner and that person's a slave. But so what? We were both born, and therefore we should have mercy upon others and copy God's attributes, as it says, Tov Hashem lakol v'lachamav al kol ma'asav. God is merciful to all His creations, and so too we should be merciful as well to all of our creations. And so we see, alongside the exclusionary tradition, are many, many sources, stories, and laws that are inclusionary. And so when we're faced with this and think about which one applies today, and why did both of these come about, we can look no further than the Meiri, one of the very famous and important of the Rishonim, who says, all people who are of the nations that are disciplined through the ways of religion and worship the divinity in any way, even if their faith is far from us, are excluded from the principle of inequality of Jews and Gentiles. Rather, they are like full-fledged Jews with respect to these matters, even with respect to lost property and other matters with no distinction whatsoever. It goes on including the ox and so on, right? So he says all these exclusionary matters, this was at a time when people around us were not schooled in morality, and so therefore they didn't join the social contract of treating everybody with respect. And therefore, because they were not within society, within that human understanding, they lost that right. And especially over centuries of persecution, when Jews, just to survive, were being attacked on all sides, they had to put up walls and say, let's hunker down, we have to take care of ourselves, put all our resources in making sure we just survive. And so it's understandable why that tradition of exclusion came up, considering the historical circumstances. However, Meiri says, nowadays, when we're surrounded in countries where people follow a religion, doesn't matter which one, but they have fear of God, they understand the value of morality. In all these cases, all the laws of the Torah that mention achicha, or amitecha, or re'echa, they apply to everyone equally. Right, so this is such an important statement and to think about. And so I'd like to what year? 1200s. Right, and so I'd like to really end with a word from the Kuzari. Most of what I'm saying tonight is based on an article, one by Rabbi Shammah, another one by Professor Moshe Halbertal. And who quotes the Kuzari. Kuzari, the king who's challenging the Jewish sage. And Jewish sage talks about Jews are kind and merciful and so on. And the Kuzari says, well, you've never had an opportunity to be cruel, right? Because you haven't been powerful. So of course. But what would happen one day if you become powerful and you're in charge and sovereign over other minorities that are in your nation? Then will you still hold up to those values that you hold so dear and that you teach? And I think that question is really the challenge of our day. Now that we have a state of Israel that's in charge and that has many, many different minorities of religions and races within it, right? I think Israel does a great job, but it's just beginning, and we have to make sure that it continues to uphold the greatest values of human rights for all of its citizens. We're celebrating the Balfour Declaration next week, and that is part of the essence of the Balfour Declaration, and so a worthy topic to think about over the next month. And furthermore, we talk about neighbor in an age of globalization. And we say, who is our neighbor? And well, nowadays you can take a quick flight and be, in Africa in, a few hours. You can communicate, you can send things, you can send money or aid, easily. And so now we can't just say, well, that's in a faraway country, I have no idea, I have no access to it, I have no way of helping. But rather, in a way, the entire world has become smaller and everybody is our neighbor. And so certainly there has to be priorities and there has to be levels, and the aniyim of our city, of our place, are forefront. And by the way, that source never says only the Jewish aniyim of your city, but all aniyim of your city. And one quick thing, in Yeshiva University, with Uptown campus, which is in a difficult neighborhood in Spanish Harlem, they have a program where the college students go out and they tutor kids in the public schools, right? Because they're our neighbors. Right, we happen to be there, and these other kids are there, and they can use a little help, and they go and tutor them. Right, that's what it means. That's what it means also to be a neighbor. So certainly we prioritize our family first, right? Our own communities first, our immediate neighbors, Jews and then non-Jews. people in Israel, it's our nation, right? So of course these are priorities, but fundamentally that obligation to human rights applies to all. And to some mother who lost a child because of malaria or some other preventable disease somewhere in Africa, she's our neighbor too. Thank you.